Hello everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Anthony Salas, and on behalf of the American Marketing Association, I'd like to welcome you to today's webcast sponsored by CMI, entitled, Are Your Customer Relationships Sticky? 3 Research Approaches to Improve Engagement During and After the Honeymoon Period. We here at the AMA provide you with this webcast as one of the many special programs offered to the marketing community, and we invite you to participate in this ongoing series of free web seminars to help you drive the greatest return on your marketing investments. You can join us every week for these informative thought leader webcasts that do feature some of the most expert minds in marketing. And you can see a full list of upcoming webcasts if you go to ama.org/webcast. And before starting today's presentation, just a few housekeeping items to go over. We are recording the full presentation, and it will be made available to you soon after, so look for that coming your way via email. If you have any questions as the presentation goes on, please use the chat feature that you should see to the left of your screen. Any technical questions you might have, you can enter there as well, and we'll respond to those immediately upon receipt. And content-related questions, we do encourage you to enter those at any time as the presentation goes on. We will address those at the end of the formal presentation. And if you are able to join us on Twitter today, we certainly look forward to your engagement there. The hashtag that we're using is #StickyCustomers, so please engage with the other participants as the presentation goes on. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. We're being joined by Brian Lundy, Vice President of Client Solutions, Customer Experience Practice Leader. And with over 20 years of focused work in customer experience and loyalty, Brian consults with clients to design, implement, and apply customer experience information systems that produce critical insights for business results. And Brian has a lot of great information to share with you today, so with that, I'm going to turn things over to him to get today's presentation started.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I hope since you're on this call, you're likely to be in a warm spot in front of a computer somewhere in an office. Many of us up here in the northern part of the country are experiencing finally a warming up, so we're enjoying. I'm starting to think maybe 30 degrees is tropical here in the Chicago area where I'm based. And I have colleagues down in Atlanta who have been surviving a bit of a traumatic snowstorm down there as well. So I'm glad everyone's here today. Thank you for joining us. You know, in 2007, Chip and Dan Heath published a book called Made to Stick, Why Some Ideas Survive and Others Die. Many of you may have read that book. It was very popular. If you haven't, I recommend it. It's still very, very current. It was really about how to make ideas more sticky based on how you communicate them. And the authors defined a sticky idea as one that is understood, one that's memorable, and has a lasting impact by changing the audience's opinions and behaviors. Now, I was thinking about that as we were preparing for this event, that it's not a bad way really to think about how to create sticky customer relationships. You have to deliver experiences that are, first of all, understandable. Your customer-facing processes can't be confusing, ambiguous, unstable. Those are all things that have to be dealt with in delivering at least a good customer experience. But beyond that, to deliver great experiences, they need to be memorable. You have to embed and demonstrate your unique brand promise in the experience. You want to try to create some contrast with the fog of your competitive set. So that's where memorable comes into play. And finally, customer experiences, to create customer relationships that are sticky, they need to have an impact on the customer, an impact that helps them meet their needs, achieve their goals, solve their problems. I guess you could say it has to produce the results that your customers need and desire, which of course are both functional and emotional. So we think one of the best ways to increase the stickiness of your customer relationships is during the honeymoon period. You know, those early days in the relationship where expectations start to encounter reality. But before we get to that, I wanted to first address this question. Some of you on this call perhaps are still a little skeptical about customer experience. And you know, there's a lot of buzz about that term now. And I know even to me, being in this field for many years, it still feels like it maybe is just another trendy sort of management fad and buzzword. It helps sell a lot of books and consulting time. But really, I think customer experience is just a label for, you know, the latest evolution of business practices that have been around for a long time. I think back even to Peter Drucker in 1974 in his book Management Tasks, Responsibilities, and Practices said there's only one valid definition of a business purpose: to create a customer. It's the customer who determines what a business is. It's the customer alone whose willingness to pay for a good or service converts economic resources into wealth and things into goods. So that's pretty. That was quite a while ago, and that's pretty foundational to the nature of a business, to create a customer. That's why customer experience matters. It's fundamental. You have to not only create, but of course by implication keep customers. However, even with that being said, some people, like maybe your CFO, might still say, show me the money. What's the economic value of customer experience? I have to say, whenever I hear that question, I'm always tempted to quote Derek Bach from Harvard, when he was challenged about the cost of a college degree, he said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. It's sort of like that. If you think delivering great customer experience is expensive, try delivering poor ones. Still, it's a valid question. Last year in June, Forrester published a report called The Business Impact of Customer Experience, and they estimated that the net annual revenue benefit of superior customer experiences ranged from $88 million for a consumer electronics manufacturer to as much as $3.1 billion. This is annual revenue benefit for wireless telecom providers. I think the average across the 13 industries they studied was something like almost $740 million in net annual revenue benefit. Now, of course, these numbers are approximations. They're based on some assumptions, but I think the point is still pretty compelling. There is material economic benefit to delivering customer experiences that are better on average than your competition. The only real question is exactly how much the benefit is for your firm. And of course, that's something that you could build a model and analysis that would answer that question specifically for you. So I don't think the question is whether or not there is economic benefit. It's only a question of how much. Now, in thinking about how to achieve the benefits of customer experience, we might think about a maturity curve like this one. This also happens to come from Forrester. There are many different versions of the CX maturity models out there. Forrester defines customer experience maturity into these four groups. And as they kind of illustrate here, it's sort of like climbing a mountain. You can't get to the top without going through the interim stages. These four stages, very briefly, are, first of all, where we all start is in repair. Detecting problems, fixing customer issues, responding to complaints, resolving errors, removing quality defects, all those things about just sort of getting it right the first time, and reducing and eliminating poor experiences is the foundation that every company has to start with. And really, we never, in some sense, although this looks like a mountain climb, we never really leave repair. There are always going to be issues that we have to solve. The point of this is to say that's where the focus is and the energy is in the business, is really around repair and repair only. The next stage is elevate, and this is really about raising awareness across the business of the importance of focusing on the customer, right? Starting to cultivate what we might call customer experience thinking, recognizing or even maybe here asking the question, first of all, well, what is it like for the customer to engage with our business? How does the customer feel about our products and services? What's really happening out there? Sort of getting outside of the problem detection and correction world, going beyond that a little bit to start thinking across the business about how every function, every department, every person in the organization is thinking about what it's like for the customer, building that sort of customer-centric view in the company. Moving from there, the next level is optimize. Here, as Forrester defines it, the focus is now on becoming intentional in designing better experiences. So we're not just listening to the customer. We're not just thinking about what the customer experience is like and sort of paying attention to the customer's world. We're now shifting into a mode where we are specifically re-engineering our processes and our products and our services to deliver better experiences. So this is where we're becoming, I would say, much more proactive, right, about engineering new ways to engage the customer. Again, beyond repair, we're still doing all that fixing work, but here we're now being much more intentional about building new experiences. And then finally, the pinnacle here is differentiate. And as Forrester defines that, this is where we begin to reframe customer needs, problems, and desires into opportunities where we can deliver something beyond even addressing the needs and problems and issues that customers have today. I would describe differentiate slightly differently as the place where we're beginning to really leverage our brand as a part of the experience, and we're creating experiences that are unique. We're doing things that our competitors, even though they might be delivering similar products and services, they're not doing it in the same way. And there is a difference that the customer feels when they interact with our organization that reinforces our brand promise. So that's the 4 steps of the maturity model. Now we're going to take a moment here, and I would like to ask all of you a quick poll question to think about these 4 levels of maturity. And I'm just going to ask you to quickly indicate in just a moment where you think your company is overall, just as kind of a quick gut check on where everybody is at. I realize some of you may not be employed in a commercial enterprise. You may be a student or something, so there'll be an option in our poll for you to say it doesn't apply, which is fine. I also have I have no idea option, just in case you really have never thought about this and don't have a good sense of where your company is. But I'm hoping you can kind of look at these 4 levels and think about where you might sit. So I'm going to open up the poll, and if you would just take a moment to think about that and let us know where you think your company is on this maturity curve. And I'll just leave this open for a few seconds. While you're doing that, I think, as I mentioned, there are other maturity models out there. I think the value of having a model like this is it helps you set some goals. Not only if you're working in a research-oriented role where we're thinking about measurement, typically, or consumer insights, but also if you're in a customer experience management, a practitioner role, sort of thinking ahead a year, 2 years, where are we trying to get to, and thinking about what that might look like organizationally and culturally. Having a sense of where you are in this maturity model is a good way to help you kind of think ahead to what might be useful as a next step. I think it also is a way of reminding us, just like if you were climbing a mountain, kind of going back to the mountain climbing metaphor there are some places in a mountain climb that can be very difficult. And it's usually helpful to have somebody with you when you reach those difficult spots who knows how to navigate that particular tricky spot. Someone who's either climbed it before or been with others who have climbed it before. That's why I believe I'm not a mountain climber, but my understanding is when teams climb Everest, they always have a guide or an experienced person, at least one along with them, who understands the terrain and how to get through that. That can also be very helpful in the case of an organization's climb through this maturity model. There may be some stages here where it's very helpful to have an expert, a guide along with you who has been there with other companies. Okay, I see that we have some results in, and you should see those once you have submitted a response. You'll see those results on your screen. And I think I'll just wait just another minute here, and then we'll close off the poll. So if you haven't responded yet, please indicate where you think you are, and then we'll close the poll off. What I'm seeing is about a fifth of the people on this call are saying their companies are in the repair stage, and about a quarter of you are saying you're in the elevate stage, and 20%, another fifth in optimize, and about 12.5% in differentiate. It's very interesting. According to Forrester, really only about 10% of companies are in that differentiation stage, and so we're not far from that. We're pretty well aligned there with 12% of our group. Maybe a little optimistic. That's a very difficult level to achieve, where you are really leveraging the power of your brand as a part of the actual customer experience. But I think, as this poll suggests, most companies, most of us are down in these lower levels and working on getting to the next stage. That's really, and I'm going to close the poll off now, that's really the point of this webinar today, is to talk about some techniques and methodologies to help us get to the next stage. So we're going to talk about this thing we were going to keep calling the honeymoon period today. What does that really mean? Why are we focusing on that? Well, I think we would say we all know intuitively, right, by our own life experience, that early moments or stages of a relationship are critical. Like, ask any job candidate or salesperson about the importance of making a first good impression, initially, that first impression. Behavioral economics, I think more recently as that field has grown and developed and many academics have focused in this area, has taught us something called the anchoring effect, which is really, I would say, almost the academic definition of what a first impression is, right? The anchoring effect is a cognitive bias. We rely too heavily on the first information that we receive when we're making a decision. So what that means is that the honeymoon period with your customers, whether it lasts for moments or months, it's going to be an anchor for their feelings about you. It's going to establish a point in on the scale of the strength of their engagement and relationship that's going to have an effect that's going to carry forward. The last thing you want, if you're trying to build sticky relationships with your customers, is you don't want to be fighting an uphill battle by making a less than stellar first impression. Understanding your customer's early life cycle is going to give you a lot of opportunities to set your customer on a path to a higher lifetime value if you can deliver really great experiences in this early stage. That's why the honeymoon period is, in our view, so critically important. Now, this is a typical loyalty model. Many of you have seen pictures like this or used them in your own presentations. The honeymoon period here is really that engage phase of the cycle. This is where we're initially starting to build the relationship. It's where, as I said before, we're beginning to have reality meet up with the customer's expectations. There is always a honeymoon period for a customer, right? So it's only a function of how long it lasts. It may only be for a few minutes. If you think about the first time, for example, if you're traveling and you try a new fast food restaurant that you've never been to before, that's a brief honeymoon period. It could stretch over weeks or even months. I'm going to give you an example in just a moment of some work we've done with clients where the honeymoon period lasts over a period of many weeks. But in complex scenarios like a B2B services environments, or if you step back further and even think about like a large custom commercial construction project, it could literally be years in which the foundation is being laid for the relationship that you may have from that point forward. So the honeymoon period is that initial phase. My point here is really just to say, if you haven't thought of it this way, start to think about the fact that your customers really do experience this honeymoon period, and you need to understand what that is like for them. These first impressions, again, are going to kind of establish a trajectory, for the future of the relationship. Let's get into these three approaches that we're going to share with you. Now, I'm going to be drawing on examples from a couple different industries, and I want you to try to be open about how these ideas and principles can be transferred to your type of business. Because really the underlying nature of the customer problem, what the customer is trying to get accomplished during this early stage, are really very similar across industries. Here's three quick examples. So imagine you've moved and you have to establish a new cable or satellite TV service. I'm sure there are people on this call that have been through this, and you know some of the frustration of that startup and installation period, right? And you know, as I do by my own experience, if that initial startup phase doesn't go well and you have problems and the service doesn't function correctly in the beginning, or you don't have enough information to get the value out of what you've just purchased, and you have to go back and forth with the company many times to get it right, that creates a certain kind of negative momentum in that relationship. That may carry for quite some time. You may develop a bad taste in your mouth for this service provider that when your renewal contract comes up even 2 years later, you're much more willing and open to considering an alternative because of what happened during that onboarding phase. Second example, what about, many of us have just gone through this at the end of last year, enrolling in new health insurance. It feels like it's sort of becoming an annual ritual now, right? So think about the steps you go through just to actually use those benefits, and then your early experience, your first experiences with a claim or getting reimbursed. I wouldn't really put the word honeymoon with all of that, but it's the same idea, right? All of those initial contacts and experiences that I have with that new insurance provider establish a foundation and a momentum for that relationship. Last example, buying a new cell phone. So imagine you have decided to switch to a different platform from an iPhone to an Android or vice versa, and you're switching carriers. Again, you're facing a startup phase, a honeymoon period with that new phone, that new device, as well as that new carrier. Lots of opportunities to get things right there for both the phone manufacturer and the carrier. Lots of opportunities to get things wrong that's going to establish momentum for the future. So let's get into our first example. We're calling this customer journey discovery. This is an example that comes out of financial services, and the work here was fundamentally an ethnographic style project to get at some of the issues for this client in terms of the onboarding process. Their business problem is stated here. They knew that they had a good onboard experience. They have an ongoing customer feedback program. They measure all kinds of things about customer experience, and they have data that tells them that customers were generally pleased and satisfied with the onboarding experience. But this client wasn't satisfied with that. They wanted to have a great experience. They really wanted to leverage the power of this honeymoon period to build stronger engagement that would carry forward into the relationship so that these customers would be willing to put more of their business with this company. So, their question is, how do we identify some specific strategies across our channels to improve this early stage experience? So here's the approach that we used in this particular instance. We recruited customers who were new to the business, who were just coming on board, to participate in a longitudinal, approximately 12-week study. So this is a panel-style design. Over the course of those 12 weeks, we used both ethnographic exercises as well as quantitative pulse surveys. The way we did this at this particular point in time was with a couple of different platforms that we were leveraging. So we're using two different systems, basically, one for the qualitative work and one for the quantitative work. We were basically mixing these activities between qual and quant over the course of the 12 weeks. During that same period of time, we also asked customers to send us artifacts, examples of the communications, principally, that they were receiving from our client. We wanted to see what the customer was actually seeing. We wanted to know when, exactly at what point in that onboarding experience they actually received it. And, of course, as we're engaging them in these activities at the same time, one of the things we're able to do is to align those communication and messaging points along with their feelings and attitudes about the experience itself. Some of the results that we started to observe as we went through this process across, as I said, it was about 12 weeks or about 100 days. A couple things started to emerge that were pretty interesting. First of all, this upper graph, what you see is kind of basically the proportion of the communication flow between the company, our client, and the customer. So the blue line sort of represents the frequency with which customers were reaching out to the company, and the green line represents the frequency by which the company was touching the customer through proactive communication. That aligns with the graph on the bottom where you see several metrics related to satisfaction, emotional impact, and value add. And obviously, we can all see instantly something is happening between weeks 3 and 5 in this experience. We look up above and we see that there's a relative balance between the proactive and reactive communications going on between the company and its clients. But they're sort of at a low point or lower point from where they started, so there's not as much communication going on during that period of time. And we see that in almost all cases, these measures that we're tracking are dropping between weeks 3 and 5. So the question is, what's going on? Now, the first point I want to make about this before we get to that answer is this is the kind of thing that you can only see, obviously, by doing a longitudinal style or panel style design. If all I had was where customers started and where they ended, if you sort of look at week 1 and week 12, it would be a very boring study, not a lot of insight. But when you understand that there is a flow that's occurring over the course of those 12 weeks and that the attitudes and opinions of customers are fluctuating based upon what's going on during that experience over those 12 weeks, a whole different, much more interesting story emerges. And I'm going to come back to that theme again a little bit later in our conversation this morning. So what are some things that we learned? Well, we learned, first of all, that there are a lot of sort of nuances and emotional components to the individual experiences in this onboarding process. This is a financial services situation, so for many people there's a very high emotional valence to the experience because we're dealing with their money, and they have expectations about what's going to happen with their money. So for a lot of customers, and we saw this through the ethnographic side of the work, this was a pretty important experience for them. It was telling them a lot about what they can expect from this company as a partner going forward. Some customers felt really good about it. You know, as I said, our client in general was delivering very good experiences. But there were certainly some customers who we discovered, of course, were not having the kind of experience that our client really wanted them to have. They wanted to move to that level of great experience, as I said. So we focused in on 3 specific questions with these customers. We wanted to understand, it's not that we asked them these questions explicitly, but this is what we're withdrawing from both the qualitative and quantitative information. What was our client company doing really well? One of the things we learned here, for example, was that customers really, really liked the web tools that they had available to them during this early stage of the experience. Those customers who interacted with a representative from the firm felt like the rep was very smart and capable, answered their questions well, all of that. So those were some highlights. What could have been better? We heard a lot about, I don't understand what my options are. I don't really understand very well the choices that you're making available to me. So that was important to customers, to get more insight into what kinds of options they might be able to take advantage of as this relationship unfolds. And what can they expect going forward? So not focusing just on this initial phase, but now based on that, looking ahead, what is it that I'm expecting of you as a provider, right? And one of our key learnings there was that people are expecting, okay, this has been helpful, you sort of walked me through these early steps, but I don't need you to hold my hand forever here. These are people that envision themselves as being more independent, that have the ability to make these decisions going forward. Now that you've gotten them on board, they are going to need somewhat less hand-holding, but they do expect you to be there when they need you. Following that, in terms of action areas and conclusions, things that we suggested for the client, we first of all focused on 3 particular conclusions, I guess. Now, these were not based specifically on our client's performance. These were based on what was really relevant and meaningful to the customers that we were following through this onboarding experience. So the first one was the idea of giving them confidence. That was really important, that customers felt like they made a good decision, that they've chosen someone who's reliable and is going to help them be a confident investor, that they need to experience this onboarding process in such a way that it's building confidence for the future. They want it to be personal, our second conclusion. So get to know me a little bit, find out something about me as a person and what my needs and wants are. Stay in touch with me, follow up on things, right? Don't just kind of get me through the process from an administrative perspective and then move on, right? Which is the way a lot of customers experience sometimes these longer onboarding processes. It feels more like it's just a set of administrative hoops to jump through. Customers want it to be more personal. Finally, make sure I'm getting relevant communication and educate me. Again, back to that point about options. What are my choices? Make the communications a little bit more customized and personal. Make sure I understand more about you as a provider and what your services and capabilities are. Give me more chance to interact with people. Don't make this all about, the web and email. I want more positive live interaction. So these were all things that we learned from the customers that were going to be essential to building a positive, a really great experience during this onboarding phase. Our client took 3 actions and sort of sequentially as a result of this work. So I'm just trying to close the loop with you here. They designed an alternative communications program. So they came up with some ways that they could modify the communications flow and content during these first 100 days. We developed with them a quantitative testing protocol. I'm actually going to share a little bit of insight into that kind of idea, the testing phase of it, a little bit later. So testing whether or not the newly designed communications and sequencing and so on was really making a difference in where customers ended up. And then finally, based upon the results of those tests, of course, putting in place some permanent change to optimize the overall marketing program around this onboarding process. So this turned out to have some very practical, meaningful results and implications for our client. Now, very quickly, a couple of things we learned as a provider in this case, for those of you that are in a customer insights function. As I mentioned, we used a couple of different platforms initially to engage with the customers in this panel, one qualitative and one quantitative. Really using an integrated platform is the way to go. It's not that it can't be more independent means or independent methods like that, but it's not ideal. There's lots of advantages. We'll talk about those a little bit later of an integrated platform. Second of all, we decided that as a result of this experience with this client, there were several things that were going to be particularly important. We need to have an engagement team that's focused on keeping the panelists engaged. I think those of you that probably do panel work already are quite familiar with this need. You need to have somebody, a focused team of people who are paying attention to the panelist participation over the course of this even relatively short-term 12-week period. You need a combination of skills to do this kind of work, both the qualitative discovery skills as well as the analytic skills on the quantitative side, and those things have to be synthesized together. Doing a project like this is not as simple as a traditional qual or quant study on its own. Pulling things, both qual and quant, together in a platform, in a community context, is got some nuances and challenges to it that are important to understand and appreciate if you're going to do this kind of work. Okay? Let's move on to our second example. In our second example, we're going to change industries a bit. We're going to move from financial services and talk more about pharmaceuticals. So you can see how this works in a very different context. Now, they have a very different kind of honeymoon challenge when a patient starts a new drug therapy. So let's see what that challenge looks like a little bit more closely. Here's the business problem for a pharmaceutical client. Patient assistance programs, those of you that work in pharma or in a medical-related field may be familiar with these. They're basically special programs that pharmaceutical manufacturers have set up to help patients who need medications that they can't afford. So a patient assistance program offers some financial support as well as additional support around taking the medication, knowing what the side effects may be, managing through that initial phase of starting on a new medicine. Now, it's important for these companies to get this right because they want patients obviously to stay on the medication because that's going to achieve the best health outcome. They've been prescribed this medication because a physician feels it's the right solution for their health condition. The other reason it's important to the pharma companies, of course, is that also by keeping patients on the meds, it reinforces the value of their brand with physicians. Third thing that our pharmaceutical clients have been telling us is that they are feeling increasing outside regulatory pressure and special interest pressure to have more influence on the likelihood that patients will adhere to their medicines, right? As opposed to the model that says, well, we manufacture these high-quality products that treat certain conditions. Physicians prescribe them, and it's really completely up to the physician at that point to make sure the patient does what he or she needs to. More and more pressure is building on pharmaceutical companies to do what they can to make sure patients stay on their meds, and again, for the purpose of seeing the positive health benefits that arise from that. Now, what's surprising about this and why it's a problem is that a surprising number of patients drop out of these programs. So even though they're getting financial assistance and they're getting some sort of support around taking this new medication, they don't stick with it. Now, we view this as kind of another type of honeymoon problem, right? This is the early stage of the experience on a new drug. How do we make sure that the patient stays enrolled in the program and continues to take the medication? So the goals for the client are, first of all, understand the triggers and touch points by following the customer through this onboarding journey. Figure out then how to increase the effectiveness of those touch points, those moments of truth, resolving the pain points, et cetera, along that path. Make sure that patients understand what kind of health outcomes they can expect to achieve as a result of adhering to the protocol that they're on. And then, of course, reap the benefits of that, both in terms of patient health and, as I said before, reinforcing the brand value to the physician community. So that's what our client wanted to achieve. How did we do that? In this case, we recruited a short-term community using a single platform, single integrated platform, a marketing research online community platform, again using integrated qualitative and quantitative techniques. And then we built a strategy around how this client could modify some specific points, specific touch points in the experience to get a better result. I mentioned before the importance of an integrated platform. Actually three specific advantages we see here. Easier to use advanced analytics because you have an integrated quantitative capability that sits right alongside the qualitative efforts that you're engaged in with these customers over time. You can leverage familiar technologies to consumers like Skype for live conversations. And if it's appropriate, you can leverage the value of real-time feedback via mobile using these integrated platforms. So there's some clear advantages to taking an integrated approach. Here's one of the outputs as sort of an illustration of one of the outputs from this type of work. What you're seeing here is it's not exactly a process-driven journey map like some of you may be used to seeing. This is really, I would describe it almost like a walking in the customer shoes map. This is very customer-oriented in that all of these touch points and markings along the way are based upon what customers are experiencing. What you see in the gray boxes are the actual events or touch points, things that customers had to do or ways in which they interacted with the company through the patient assistance program. The green boxes are a few examples of sort of thoughts and feelings from customers, things they were telling us about what was happening at that point. For example, you see there kind of in the middle, it says, "What a relief." That's this sort of emotional feeling around, well, I've successfully managed to enroll myself in this program, and I'm going to start receiving the medication. So since this was something that they were prescribed because there was a medical need, there is this sense of, okay, I kind of got through these hoops, and I'm able to finally start taking this medicine. The blue boxes sort of represent these critical decision points. Things sort of underneath the surface that customers are thinking about as they experience this onboarding process with this new medication. Now, as you can see at the very right-hand side, what ends up happening in too many cases at the end is what's here called non-adherence, meaning once the customer had been through the initial supply of the medication and it was time to refill, in this particular case, they had to basically almost reapply, not in a full sense like they did initially, but they had to go through like a recertification process and provide more paperwork in order to continue receiving the medication under this program. Further, as you can see in the blue box just to the left of non-adherence where it says these side effects are making me nervous, another thing we observed as we followed patients through this is that there were quite a number of patients who were experiencing some level of side effect or type of side effect that they were not expecting or they were unsure about, and they were seeking information about that in the course of their initial experience. So that is a simple example. Following that, you can easily understand the kinds of actions that the client would take to respond to some of those concerns that we're uncovering during the journey. Making it easier for people to sort of step through the enrollment process, creating a live chat feature that can walk someone through the forms and answer questions and help relieve anxiety about the information that's being requested. Instead of sending an email halfway through, changing that to a personal call from someone who's specifically going to interact with the patient to talk about how they're doing, review the adherence plan, when to take the medication, whether it's with food, not with food, time of day, all those details that are important to a patient getting the best experience. Putting some automation into their online portal was another action step to detect when a patient might be experiencing, for example, some issues with side effects. They start to do some research within the patient assistance program portal on side effects. That's a trigger, right? Why is the patient now investigating these side effects? There may be a concern there. So let's use that intelligence to initiate some live chat when the customer is doing that kind of research to see if we can coach them through it. Week 11, along with that motivational email, personalize it a bit based upon what we know about this patient so far through the patient assistance program. Do that a little bit sooner in the experience. Those are some specific actions that will help reduce the likelihood that patients are not going to adhere to the program at the end. So again, what you're seeing is this sort of learning that can happen only through this kind of detailed process of following the customer through this onboarding experience, and some very tactical, very specific actions that can be identified following from that. Our third example, we've been talking about following customers through a journey. Well, from a more quantitative perspective, both of my first two examples have had a little bit more heavy of a qualitative emphasis. Let's also talk about what the onboarding and honeymoon period process how it can be improved through a little bit more of a quantitative approach. So we're calling this rethinking longitudinal analysis. This is not so much a case example, but this is an illustration of applying an analytical technique that's been around for a long time, frankly, but has not been used typically in the customer experience environment. We just want to expose this to you as a kind of a new idea, something to challenge your thinking a little bit. Here the situation is, as I mentioned earlier, once you've done all this work, you're going to want to design or change your onboarding experience in some specific ways. How do you know if that redesign will actually result in more effective customer engagement or customer loyalty at the end of the process? In other words, how do you test experiences that unfold over time? That's really the question. Now, traditional approaches to testing alternatives, right? We're all familiar probably with these. I just put a couple here. Traditional concept testing using things like conjoint analysis or discrete choice methodologies. The challenge with the kind of experiences we're talking about here is that it's somewhat artificial to present customers with descriptions of experiences that actually take a long time to develop. It's not quite the same thing as choosing among a set of product features. It's a little bit of a different kind of scenario for a customer to try to evaluate. So concept testing, as it's traditionally practiced at least, is somewhat too artificial in these situations. Second thing is that concept testing doesn't really account for time. We need to see how the customer experience evolves from start to finish over the course of this onboarding process. Also, concept testing doesn't do a good job of handling the interactions between different stages of the experience over time. So something that happens at time period 2 has an effect of what it actually means to the customer at time period 5. It's hard to reflect that effectively in a test that would be constructed around traditional concept testing methods. Another way to do this, and it's not a bad way, it's just we think maybe not always the best way, is a pre-post style approach. The problem with pre-post, where you measure at the beginning and then you wait till we're near the end of our process and measure again, is that you're really limited because you're typically taking samples of customers pre and post to just forming some aggregated conclusions. There's also, as I pointed out earlier, sort of missing the dynamics that are occurring between the beginning and the end that can actually be extremely important to understanding how to make that experience better. So the technique we're talking about applying as an alternative is something called latent growth modeling. Now, latent growth modeling has been around a long time. It's been used a lot in academic settings for studying things like academic performance over along with grade progression. It's used sometimes in the study of health outcomes, where we're following patients over a long period of time to see how their condition changes based upon the protocol, the medical protocols they're following. Those are a couple places where it's been used quite a bit. So it's not some new technique that no one's ever tried or heard of before. It's quite commonly used in those kinds of settings. However, where it's not been used very much is in the customer experience arena. And we think because the focus here is so much on this longitudinal nature of the honeymoon period, latent growth modeling actually has some promise for us. How do you do it? Well, basically, think about, again, both of the scenarios I've given you. You're going to have a panel of customers that you're going to follow over time. You need to define what success looks like at the end. So how do we know if the experience is better? Well, we have to define that, whether it's in terms of specific behavioral outcomes we're seeking, like adherence in the medical case, or more attitudinal measures like some loyalty metrics. We have to define that, develop the metrics that are going to tell us whether or not we've achieved success, build our panel, follow customers through the experience, measuring these, using the metrics we've developed to measure the experience throughout that time frame. So we'll not only be tracking, say high-level indicators like overall loyalty or engagement, but also some of the underlying factors that we think are influential in driving loyalty or engagement. We're tracking those period by period. Then when we get to the end, we're going to look at the different kinds of paths or tracks, if you will, that customers follow in getting from start to finish based upon their experience over the course of time. So in a typical pre-post approach, like I mentioned a moment ago, this is what you would see, right? Here I've just made up three examples of a control and 2 test groups. And we start off in January, everybody's about the same. 6 months later we measure again, and we definitely see some differences. Of course, the problem is we don't know what's happening in the middle. The next chart shows you more an example of what is happening in the middle. Hopefully you can immediately recognize there's some tremendous value in seeing these sort of interim data points. Just based on this alone, without having any more analysis, I think I already have learned some things about what's going on, and I have some specific questions now that I would like to answer that will help me maybe ultimately design the best possible experience. For example, look at the month of March. Why is it that our test 2 group, which actually ended up being the lowest at the end, is actually the highest in that particular time period? So the research question is, what's behind that? What's explaining the difference between test 2 and the other groups in March? A second question might be, sorry, I should advance the next slide so you can see what I'm highlighting. A second question might be, why are we seeing the steady trend of improvement in the test 1 group over these last 3 months? What's really behind that? And why is the test 2 group, for example, falling off from a peak in March? You could come up with your own questions, but those are a couple things that I would highlight just based on that. Now, the importance of using latent growth modeling is that now that I've identified these sort of different paths that customers are following through these experiences, I can actually break that down using this latent growth modeling approach into what's driving these differences. So for example, we find that for that test 2 group in March, the reason that they're doing so much better than the other 2 groups is because they're feeling in that period of time, based upon the treatment they received over the course of this onboarding experience, let's say, they were feeling cared for to a much higher level in March, and that was very important to them at that point in time. That in this stage of the unfolding experience, they wanted to feel customers wanted to feel cared for. And because the test 2 group, the conditions of that group were such that those feelings of being cared for were being supported and optimized at that time, we saw a much better result. But in contrast, if I look at why the test 1 group is doing so well at the end, it's coming from a very different place. It's about perceptions of confidence, and that's what's driving that steady increase. So to put it simply, and I know we're getting near the end of our time, I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time for questions. We want to understand the different drivers behind these different patterns, and that's what latent growth modeling helps us do. So one conclusion I might reach from this is maybe there's something I could do with my test 1 group that ultimately does the best at the end. Maybe I could do something in the month of March to learn from, the test 2 group and build stronger feelings of being cared for among my test 1 design, so that I could boost that experience and maybe even achieve a higher total result at the end. That's a very simple illustration of the concept, but we wanted to just share that with you as an idea for a way to get more insight out of longitudinal data using this technique called latent growth modeling. So let's wrap up here and get to a few questions in the time we have remaining. In terms of key takeaways, I would say these are the sort of some main conclusions that we would reach. You have to follow people through the journey. Nothing substitutes this longitudinal view during the honeymoon period. You have to walk in the customer's shoes. You have to understand how the experience unfolds for them. You have to learn what the context is around that journey. You need to understand the specific triggers and touch points. When do behaviors and attitudes shift during that honeymoon period? What are the pain points and moments of truth? Are there any influences outside of your process that are affecting the outcomes that customers are trying to achieve? So that detailed understanding of what's going on over the course of time as it unfolds. Leveraging the power of customer communities. And all these examples you've seen, we've talked about using kind of a customer panel approach. And the importance of being able to track the same customers over time. There's lots of technology now that makes this possible. I'm sure there are people on this call that are quite experienced with using customer communities, but this longitudinal view is much more easy to obtain now because we have capabilities like these community panel technologies that are available to support collecting this kind of data from the same people over time. Finally, once you've done all that work and you have some insight now into the journey, you have to test your alternatives. What are we going to change about the experience, and how do we know if those changes actually result in better outcomes at the end of that honeymoon period? The only way to do that, we think, is to test your options and test them longitudinally. Last point I'll make is that when communicating results from this kind of work internally, nothing works better than using compelling stories from customers. We do this a lot in our own work. We try to summarize the information we're presenting in compelling ways and illustrate it through various kinds of charts and maps and graphics and illustrations to engage people in our client organization, engage the key stakeholders in understanding the power of learning how customers experience this honeymoon period and what they can do to change it. We have some great examples of clients who have really made some significant changes in their process. One client I can think of, in fact, hired a staff person in one of their business units specifically to focus on the onboarding process, both in terms of innovation and ongoing optimization, as a result of one of these honeymoon period or onboarding studies that we did, because they started to realize the tremendous impact and power it has for really the value of the customer going forward after the honeymoon period ends. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Anthony briefly to introduce our Q&A period.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brian, and thanks for a lot of really great information that you shared today. I look forward to moving into Q&A here in a moment. Just a quick reminder to everyone before we start going through some questions, if you do still have a question for Brian, get it into that chat feature that you see to the left of your screen. I'm going to go ahead and get all that information going there. And also, I want to point out to everyone, you see Brian's contact information on this screen here at the bottom. Also want to point out the LinkedIn group for CMI. So if you are interested in learning more, you can join their group. Just search for CMI Customer Experience, and you can join the group there and get even more great information. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and start addressing some of the questions that have come in. So Brian, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Thanks, Anthony. Real quickly, I know a few people have asked about copies of the presentation, so I wanted to make sure I explained that real quickly. You are, as I think Anthony mentioned at the beginning, going to receive a recording of our webinar today, and we will be sending out an ebook, a PDF-style document to everyone that has the slides, the content, and some additional information in it. We'll be following up with everybody by email with that, so you will get the content that way, just so you know. Also, for questions that I'm not able to get to, as you see on this slide, we do have a LinkedIn group called CMI Customer Experience. If you're on LinkedIn and you want to join that group, the questions I'm unable to answer today, I will address in that group format. So that would be a place if you want to carry on this dialogue or have some more questions that occur to you after we're done, we would invite you to join that group. So a couple of the questions that we received. So one question here is, how do you figure out this qualitative versus quantitative thing when you're trying to diagnose a customer journey? Well, how do we decide between these methodologies? And I think, of course, those of us that are experienced in customer insights work know that there are strengths and weaknesses to both approaches, and you're always trying to find the sort of the optimum methodology. I gave you some examples where we really use both, and I do believe in that strongly, that having the ability through these community platforms to collect even a little bit of quantitative data in parallel with the more deep dive qualitative conversations we can have with customers is really powerful. That said, if the objective is really to understand what the customer experience is like, to get those emotional components sort of out on the table, if you will, during the onboarding experience, qualitative is really the best way to make that happen. You have to get into these conversations and learn these individual customer stories to really pull that kind of information out, we believe. There are lots of different qualitative techniques and methods, of course, that can be used to do that, but nothing's going to substitute for those direct and interactive dialogues with customers. Obviously, from a measurement standpoint, if you're trying to validate the extent of certain kinds of experiences, the frequencies, and get counts and measures, if you're trying to build predictive models for whether or not certain kinds of changes, like in the testing environment, are going to produce the desired result, quantitative obviously is a better way to go. One of you asked about whether or not when we build these panels, are the customer participants aware that they're selected? So great question. So in the case where we're doing that, like the last example I showed you where there's a control group and 2 test groups, all those participants would know that they are obviously participating in a panel. They've been recruited, but they certainly do not know which group they're in. They don't know that they're receiving a different treatment than any other group. They just know that we are asking them the same set of questions over the course of those 12 weeks, let's say, or whatever period of time it is. So that's fundamental, of course, so we're not introducing bias in the outcomes of those measurements that we're taking along the way. So I think that's important in designing these tests, is that customers may know that they're part of a panel, of course, but they certainly don't know exactly which segment they may be a part of. One last question here. I know we're at the top of the hour. How do you determine the length of the honeymoon period? Well, that's going to depend on every client situation, of course. In some cases, there is no real definitive end to the honeymoon period, so it's more a matter of judging the intensity of the interactions that may occur in early stages of a relationship. And I think with some internal conversation with your stakeholders, obviously with some conversations with customers, you can kind of get a sense of about how long that honeymoon period lasts. I think it could be, you could do a study, of course, to try to pin that down in a more quantitative way, but I think for our purposes, what we're talking about today, that's not that essential. It's more a matter of having a general frame of reference around the early stage experience. So with that, thank you all for your time. I really appreciate you joining us today. And I'll turn it back over to Anthony to close us out.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Brian. And again, a big thank you. A lot of great information shared today. Our Twitter hashtag was quite busy, so I think you really resonated with a lot of great information, so thanks again. I do want to just mention, as Brian did, we do have some questions that we were not able to get to, so for those of you that we did not respond to, if you can plan on joining that LinkedIn group that you see up on your screen there. Brian will be issuing some follow-ups in that group to some of the questions that we weren't able to address. So definitely consider becoming a member of CMI Customer Experience. So I also want to remind everyone that we are sending out a link to the recording of the webcast. So that will be coming out to you fairly soon. So look for that coming via email. Again, I mentioned the Twitter hashtag was pretty busy today, so if you were not able to join, you can still go and visit and engage in that conversation. As a reminder, the hashtag for today is Sticky Customers. And so in closing, I'd like to extend a big thank you to CMI for sponsoring today's webcast, as well as to ReadyTalk for providing the platform that we used. And if you'd like to learn more about ReadyTalk and their services, you can go to readytalk.com/AMA. And of course, I'd like to thank you, the audience, for taking an hour from your busy day to spend with us. We certainly hope you found this information helpful, and we look forward to seeing you again very soon on another AMA Thought Leader webcast. That ends our presentation for today. Thanks again for joining, and have a great rest of your day.